It was a cool autumn evening in late October 2019. The air was crisp and golden leaves crunched underfoot as people walked along the streets of Los Angeles. Inside a fancy boutique hotel, warm lights glowed, and the air smelled of fresh flowers and polished wood. The hotel was beautiful, with soft carpets, golden chandeliers, and large windows that showed the sparkling city outside. The guests in the lobby sat on comfortable chairs, chatting and sipping warm drinks. Some were reading books while others were checking their phones. A young couple, Sophia and Ethan, sat near the fireplace, enjoying their anniversary getaway. The soft crackling of the fire made the place feel cozy. Just then, the glass doors of the hotel slid open and a man walked in. He was dressed simply in a black blazer, jeans, and well-worn boots. His dark hair was a little messy, and he had a calm but tired look on his face. He didn't seem like a rich businessman or a famous celebrity. He just looked like an ordinary traveler. But what no one in the lobby knew was that this man wasn't just a guest. He was Keanu Reeves, the secret owner of the hotel. Keanu walked up to the front desk, where a woman named Samantha stood. She was the receptionist, dressed in a neat uniform with her hair tied in a tight bun. She looked professional, but her eyes were sharp, and her lips were pressed into a thin line. As Keanu approached, Samantha's eyebrows lifted slightly. She looked him up and down and frowned. "Excuse me, sir," she said in a cold voice. "Do you even have a reservation?" Keanu raised an eyebrow. He hadn't expected such a rude greeting. "Actually, I do," he said softly, reaching into his pocket for his phone. Samantha rolled her eyes and sighed loudly. She spoke just loud enough for other guests to hear. "People like you think you can just walk into places like this. This is not some cheap motel." A few people in the lobby turned their heads. Sophia and Ethan, still sitting by the fireplace, looked over, sensing something was wrong. Keanu remained calm, but a flicker of sadness crossed his face. He handed his phone to Samantha, showing her the email confirmation of his booking. Samantha barely glanced at it before shaking her head. "This isn't the kind of place you can just book on a whim," she said, her voice dripping with disapproval. "We serve an elite clientele, celebrities, CEOs, important people. People who can actually afford it. I suggest you try somewhere else." Sophia leaned toward Ethan and whispered, "Isn't that Keanu Reeves? It really looks like him." Ethan squinted. "It can't be," he whispered back. "Why would he be here?" Samantha continued speaking rudely. "Listen," she said, crossing her arms, "we have a reputation to maintain. If you can't afford this place, there's a motel down the street." Keanu took a deep breath and looked her straight in the eyes. His voice was still gentle but firm. "Is this how you treat all your guests?" Samantha smirked. "Only the ones who don't belong here," she said. Just as she was about to call security, a voice interrupted her. "Samantha," a man's voice called. The hotel manager, Richard, had just walked into the lobby. His face turned pale when he saw Keanu standing there. His eyes widened with shock and panic. "What are you doing?" Richard asked, his voice shaky. Samantha turned to him, confused. "I'm handling a situation," she said, waving dismissively at Keanu. Richard rushed over, his heart pounding. He looked horrified. "That's not just a guest," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's Mr. Reeves. He owns this hotel." The entire lobby went silent. Samantha's face turned white. Her hands trembled and she felt dizzy. The room around her suddenly seemed to spin. Keanu, however, remained calm. He didn't need to say anything. The truth was now clear. Sophia and Ethan's mouths dropped open in shock. "I knew it was him," Sophia whispered, gripping Ethan's arm. Samantha stuttered, trying to form words, but no sound came out. Richard, the manager, stepped aside, unsure of what would happen next. The guests in the lobby watched in silence. Keanu took a deep breath. He looked Samantha in the eyes, but there was no anger in his gaze, just quiet disappointment. "I believe in kindness," he said softly. "This hotel was built on that idea. Everyone deserves respect, no matter where they come from or how they look." Tears welled up in Samantha's eyes. She realized how terribly she had behaved. She had judged Keanu without knowing who he was. I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice shaking. Keanu didn't answer right away. He looked around at the guests, at Sophia and Ethan, at Richard. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what he would do. Finally he spoke. His voice was filled with emotion. "I wasn't always someone who could afford a hotel like this," he said. "There was a time when I didn't know where my next meal would come from, or where I would sleep. That's why I wanted this hotel to be different. A place where people feel welcome no matter what." Sophia wiped away a tear. She had read about Keanu's difficult past, The loss of his girlfriend, his best friend's death, his sister's illness. And yet he still chose to be kind. Samantha started crying. "I don't know what came over me," she whispered. "I let my pride and judgment cloud my heart. Please forgive me." Keanu nodded, but he didn't immediately say he forgave her. Instead he said, "Words are easy. Actions matter more. How you treat people when no one is watching is what truly counts." Richard stepped forward looking guilty. "Mr. Reeves," he said, "I take full responsibility. This is not what we stand for. I promise things will change." Keanu gave him a small nod but kept his focus on Samantha. "The world needs more kindness," he said softly. "And it starts with us." Just then a small boy about 8 years old walked up to Keanu. He held his mother's hand looking nervous. Keanu knelt down and smiled. "Hey there, buddy," he said gently. The boy took a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. His voice was quiet as he said, "My dad used to watch your movies with me before he went to heaven. He always told me you were the nicest person in Hollywood." I think he was right. Tears filled Keanu's eyes as he unfolded the paper. It was a drawing of a superhero. At the top, the boy had written, "To Mr. Reeves, the real superhero." The whole lobby was silent. Keanu pulled the boy into a soft hug. "Your dad must have been an amazing person," he whispered. "Thank you for sharing this with me." Sophia and Ethan wiped their tears. Their anniversary had become a night they would never forget. A night of kindness, forgiveness, and love. As Keanu stood to leave, he turned back to the guests and said, "This place isn't about luxury or status. It's about people. Let's never forget that." Keanu gently patted the boy's shoulder before slowly standing up. He still held the drawing in his hand, looking at it with care. His eyes then moved to the boy's mother. She had tears running down her face, but she wasn't sad. She was overwhelmed with emotion. She looked at Keanu, mouthing the words, "Thank you." It was a small moment, but for her, it meant everything. Samantha, standing nearby, still felt shaky. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had been so caught up in herself, in trying to prove that she belonged among rich and important people, that she had forgotten what truly mattered. Watching Keanu with the boy, something inside her changed. Her tears weren't just because she was ashamed of how she had treated him earlier. They came from somewhere deeper, from an ache she had been ignoring for years. Then Keanu's words echoed in her mind. "How you treat people when no one is watching shows who you really are." Samantha had spent so much of her life looking down on people who didn't fit into her world, making sure she was seen as someone important. But at that moment she realized something. She had been missing out on something far greater than money or status. The boy and his mother turned to leave, walking slowly toward the door. But before they could step outside, Keanu called after them. "Wait," he said, his voice steady but full of feeling. The boy stopped and looked back. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a small keychain. It was old and a little scratched, but it still shined under the hotel's warm lights. He knelt down again, meeting the boy's eyes. "Your dad must have been a great man," Keanu said softly. "I want you to have this. It's from a movie I made a long time ago. It's not much, but maybe when you look at it, you'll remember that heroes come in all shapes and sizes." The boy's eyes widened as he carefully took the keychain. His hands trembled slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves," he whispered, his voice small but full of gratitude. Keanu gave him a gentle smile, but in his own eyes, there was a sadness that never truly faded. As the boy and his mother left through the glass doors, Keanu watched them go. His gaze stayed on them until they were out of sight. From the corner of the room, Sophia and Ethan had been watching everything. Sophia leaned closer to Ethan and whispered, "He carries so much pain. You can see it in his eyes." Ethan nodded. "But look at how he uses it. He turns his pain into something beautiful." Keanu walked back toward the front desk where Samantha still stood. Her hands were twisting nervously. She opened her mouth to apologize again, but Keanu lifted his hand gently, stopping her. "I don't need an apology," he said softly. "I care about what happens next." Samantha's eyes filled with fresh tears. She nodded quickly, her voice shaky. "I'll do better. I promise." Keanu gave her a small nod. His expression softened. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after." At that moment, from the other side of the room, the soft sound of piano music filled the air. An older man, around 70 years old, had been sitting quietly at the hotel bar. Now he was at the grand piano, his fingers moving across the keys with ease. He played a song called Clair de Lune, and it filled the lobby with beauty. Keanu turned toward the sound, his face lighting up as he recognized the song. The man's name tag read Henry, Maintenance. He was lost in the music, unaware of how much it was touching the people around him. Keanu slowly walked toward the piano, a gentle smile on his lips. When Henry finished playing, Keanu clapped softly, making the older man look up, startled. "That was incredible," Keanu said warmly. "How long have you been playing?" Henry chuckled, rubbing the back of his head. "Longer than I've been fixing pipes, that's for sure. My wife used to love this piece. I played it for her every night before she passed away." Keanu's expression softened even more. She must have been lucky to have someone who loved her like that. Henry smiled faintly, his eyes filled with memories. "I was the lucky one." The room grew silent. The weight of the moment settled into everyone's hearts. Keanu placed a hand on Henry's shoulder. "Thank you for sharing that with us," he said quietly. Henry nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Not just for listening but for seeing people." Keanu stepped back, his mind still playing Henry's words over and over. He looked around the room at Samantha, Sophia, Ethan, the boy and his mother outside, and Henry at the piano. For a moment, everything felt heavy, the pain, the loss, the love, the hope. It all existed at once. But somehow it was beautiful. He turned back to the people in the lobby. His voice was strong but filled with emotion. "The hardest thing about being human is carrying the weight of everything we've lost," he said. "But that's also what makes love so powerful. It's what keeps us going." Sophia, now openly crying, reached for Ethan's hand. Their anniversary felt even more special now. Across the room, Samantha wiped her eyes. She made a silent promise to herself. She would never again make someone feel unseen or unimportant. And Keanu, still holding the boy's drawing in his hand, walked toward the elevators. His steps were quiet, his presence calm. But he left behind a room full of people who would never forget this moment. As the elevator doors closed, the lobby remained silent. The feeling still hung in the air, like an invisible thread connecting everyone who had witnessed it. Samantha sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. She had never felt so small, so vulnerable. Yet, at the same time, something inside her felt alive again. A deep need to be better. To remember the kindness she had lost somewhere along the way. Sophia and Ethan sat by the fireplace, holding hands. "Do you think people really understand how much pain he carries?" Sophia asked, her voice soft. Ethan shook his head. "Probably not. People see the actor, the celebrity. They don't see the man who has had to rebuild himself from nothing over and over again." Upstairs, Keanu walked into his private suite. It was beautiful, warm lights, elegant furniture. But to him it felt cold. He placed the boy's drawing on the desk by the window and stared at it. The child's words echoed in his mind. "My dad said you were the nicest person in Hollywood." Keanu sat down slowly, his hands trembling. He thought about his own father, a man who had left when Keanu was just a boy. No matter how much he achieved or how far he traveled, that emptiness never truly faded. Then he thought of Jennifer, the one who should have been here with him. Her laughter, her warmth, he missed her every day. A knock on the door startled him. "Come in," he called. Richard, the hotel manager, stepped inside. "Mr. Reeves, I just wanted to check on you. I know tonight was a lot." Keanu smiled faintly. "I'm fine." Richard hesitated. "You told me something once. You said people don't come to hotels for fancy things. They come looking for connection, a moment that reminds them why life is worth living." Richard smiled. "Tonight, you gave them that moment." Keanu chuckled softly, though his eyes shined with emotion. Later that night, as the city lights twinkled outside, Keanu sat by the desk. He picked up a pen and, on the back of the drawing, wrote, "To the boy who reminded me that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, thank you for being mine tonight." He folded the paper carefully and placed it in an envelope. The next morning, Keanu walked to the front desk with an envelope in his hands. He smiled at the hotel staff and gently placed it on the counter. "Please make sure the boy gets this before he and his mother leave," he said. The staff nodded, understanding the importance of his request. Meanwhile, upstairs, Samantha was already awake. She hadn't slept well. All night, she had been thinking about what had happened, about her mistakes, about the chance to change. When she arrived at the hotel that morning, her eyes were red from lack of sleep. But she was determined. Richard was waiting for her near the front desk, holding a hot cup of coffee. When he saw her, he raised an eyebrow. "You're here early," he said, handing her the cup. Samantha took it, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. Her voice was shaky, but her words were clear. "I want to start over," she said. "I need to." Richard studied her face for a moment. Then he gave her a small nod of encouragement. "Then let's make today count." Samantha took a deep breath and stepped behind the front desk, ready to begin again. The lobby was already busy. Some guests were in a hurry, rushing to meetings. Others sat at tables, enjoying their coffee and pastries, talking and laughing. And then, in the middle of all that movement, Samantha spotted the little boy and his mother. They were heading toward the hotel doors, ready to leave. The boy clutched the envelope tightly in his hands, his face glowing with happiness. Just as they were about to walk out, he suddenly stopped. He turned around, looking back into the lobby. His eyes searched the room until they found Samantha. Then, he lifted his small hand and waved at her. It was a simple wave, but it meant everything. Samantha felt a lump rise in her throat. She lifted her hand and waved back, blinking back tears. One slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. Because in that moment she understood something important. Keanu hadn't just given the boy a gift. The boy had also given something to all of them. A reminder that kindness could heal. A reminder that people could change. Upstairs, Keanu sat by the window looking out at the city below. The streets were coming to life. Cars honking, people hurrying to work, the sun slowly rising over the buildings. He held the boy's drawing in his hands, looking at it carefully. His heart felt full. Outside, the boy and his mother crossed the street. The morning sun cast a golden glow over everything. The boy clutched the envelope like it was the most precious thing in the world. He looked up at his mother with wide, excited eyes. "I told you, Mom," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "He's a real superhero." Inside the hotel, Samantha wiped her tears and got back to work. But something was different now. She wasn't just doing her job, she wanted to do better. To be better. Richard noticed it too. The way Samantha greeted the guests with warmth, the way her voice was softer, kinder. He knew that Keanu's kindness had changed something inside her. Upstairs, Keanu kept looking out the window, watching until the boy and his mother disappeared into the crowd. His chest felt heavy. But for the first time in weeks, there was also a small flicker of peace inside him. He looked down at the boy's drawing again. The words written in wobbly handwriting stood out. To Mr. Reeves, the real superhero. It wasn't the first time someone had called him a hero. Fans often said it, inspired by his movies or the stories of his kindness. But hearing it from this child, this boy who had lost his father, it was different. It hit somewhere deep in his heart. Because Keanu knew what it felt like to lose someone you loved. He took a deep breath, the weight of his past pressing against him like an old wound that never quite healed. He thought about Jennifer. Her laughter, her dreams, the future they were supposed to have together. He thought about his sister and how bravely she had fought her illness. He remembered how helpless he had felt watching her suffer. And yet, through all that pain, he was still here. Still standing. Still trying. Keanu walked over to a small safe in the corner of the room and opened it. Inside there were a few special things he kept close. A photograph of Jennifer. A bracelet his sister had given him. A worn-out book that his late friend River Phoenix had loved. With great care, he placed the boy's drawing inside, tucking it between the pages of the book. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Richard. "Thank you for last night. You reminded all of us why we're here. Samantha wanted me to tell you she's ready to change. I think we all are." Keanu smiled slightly and typed a simple reply. "Kindness is a ripple. Let's keep it going." Later that day, Keanu packed his bags and got ready to leave the hotel. But before he walked out, he made one last stop in the lobby. The hotel staff was waiting for him. Their faces were full of gratitude and admiration. Samantha stepped forward. She looked nervous, but her eyes were filled with sincerity. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice shaking a little. "I just want to say thank you. Not just for last night, but for giving me a second chance. I promise I'll make the most of it." Keanu met her gaze and nodded. "It's not about being perfect," he said gently. "It's about being better than we were yesterday. Keep trying." Then he stepped outside. The crisp autumn air touched his skin. The city was alive, people walking in every direction. For a moment, Keanu felt like just another person in the crowd. He liked that feeling. He pulled out his phone, opened the Notes app, and typed a few words. Sometimes, the smallest moments remind us of the biggest truths. Kindness matters. Love heals. And even in the darkest times, we can be someone's light. As he slipped the phone back into his pocket, he kept walking. The boy's drawing and words stayed in his heart. Because heroes weren't just in movies. Heroes were in small acts of love and kindness. Heroes were in the way people treated each other. And maybe, just maybe, Keanu realized something important. Even after all the loss, all the sadness, he still had love to give. He still had kindness to share. And maybe, that was enough. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories filled with adventure, mystery, and excitement. Your support means the world and it helps keep these stories coming. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.